Hello, and welcome to this eSchool News webcast. My name is Andrew Barber. I'm a senior contributing editor here at eSchool News, and I'll be acting as the moderator for today's presentation. This is the third and final installment in our three-part series on diverse learners. It's been sponsored by Fuel Education. The first two was on ELL learners and the second on accelerated learners. If you missed any of those earlier installments, which were really terrific, I encourage you to watch them on demand by clicking on the links in the Our Sponsor panel on your console. But today we're going to discuss social-emotional learners and look at some of the academic and personal challenges that can stop these students from completing their K-12 education. And in particular, we're going to explore how credit recovery can help them overcome these obstacles. And before I hand things over to our speakers for today, let me just take a couple of minutes to discuss the console that you're looking at today. First, we are going to be recording the event, and we'll be sending out an email in a day or so it's an email that will contain a link to the recorded event, and you'll also be able to download a PDF of the presentation from that same email. And second, please ask questions. Don't feel as if you have to wait until the end. At any point during the presentation, if you have a question, just type it into that Q&A panel box on your console and hit the submit button. And I hope we'll have about 10 minutes maybe at the end when our speakers can answer your questions. We also have a chat function which you can launch from that blue group chat icon down at the bottom of your screen. And I'd encourage you to use chat to talk with fellow audience members about your own initiatives in this area, or to contact me or the eSchool News team if you have any technical problems during the course of the presentation. But I do have a favor to ask of you. Please don't use the chat function to ask our panelists questions. They're just not going to have time to monitor the chats while they're doing their presentation. So if you have a question for them, please use the Q&A panel instead. We'll also be seeing a video today during the course of the presentation. And if you have trouble with that, and some people, depending on your browsers, you may have that, I would encourage you possibly to use Firefox or to certainly make sure that you have Flash enabled or downloaded. And hopefully you'll then be able to see that video. And with that out of the way, let me now introduce you to today's speakers. Renee Aboud is Director of Educational Solution Services at Fuel Education. And Renee leads a team of education specialists that's responsible for creating innovative and successful online and blended learning programs. And she specializes in working with administrators through all stages of a blended learning implementation, including strategy, design, planning, and evaluation. And before she joined Fuel Ed, Renee was a classroom teacher in both Oregon and Virginia. And I'm going to leave it to Renee to fully introduce our keynote speaker for today, who will be Kwame Simmons, the CEO of Simmons Advantage. Welcome back, Renee, for the wrap-up to this terrific webinar series. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be here again. And as you said, I've truly enjoyed the many years that I've had to spend working in education. And it's been fantastic to see such great transformation in how we take opportunities through online and blended learning and support students and enrich them with various opportunities and the different and many environments that we've been able to see. So I'm excited to be here facilitating this session today, specifically on this topic. So before we get started, though, and we hear directly from our keynote, I thought I'd take just a minute to share a little bit about Fuel Education so that our audience members understand and know who we are. Fuel Ed partners with thousands of districts across the nation and many various education programs, many of which I've had the great opportunity to visit and meet with. These leaders hold such innovative education models, and Fuel Ed has partnered with many of these schools to help transform that education experience for the student. The schools we partner with share a common goal, and we at Fuel Ed are privileged to support that by providing the products and services to support a personalized learning experience for all students. And that doesn't necessarily just include that online content piece. And we'll talk even further about one of those pieces today with social-emotional learning. And we offer, through the various content and solutions that we offer, we have a wide range of solutions that meet the needs of students in pre-K through 12th grade, so anywhere from kindergarten readiness through career readiness pathways. And meeting standards and ensuring proficiency in those standards is one thing, but FuelEd realizes that that's not the full solution, and meeting the needs of the whole student is another. And FuelEd has worked hard to determine ways that we can incorporate the needs in both our instructional model, the content we deliver, and in the models we support by providing consulting for that as well. And the one that we're here to talk about specifically today is around meeting the needs of students through social-emotional learning and their development. And with that, we'll come back a little bit to Fuel Education and how we meet those needs of that social-emotional learning piece within our content and solution. But we're going to start with understanding a much more thorough discussion and having a discussion with Kwame Simmons, who is our keynote for today. Kwame has served in high poverty communities for over 20 years, from being a substitute teacher to an assistant superintendent. And he's very proud of turning these schools into innovative models of change. For example, he helped design and implement the first blended learning school for DC public schools. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Kwame. He's going to take you through his presentation, and then we'll come back to a little bit on Fuel Education. So Kwame, thank you for being here today. Kwame, are you there?
Yes. All right. So, good afternoon, and thank you so much, Renee. I am beyond elated to be here. I am so thankful for FuelEd, for their passion around doing this work. I have spent, as Renee alluded to, so much of my adult life in high poverty communities, serving, observing, and providing feedback to so many schools and so many diverse populations that to have the honor of coming today to talk more about what I have been able to catalog along my journey is such a huge honor. So in terms of what I'd like to go over today, I think I really want to make sure that we are sharing a context of what happens when students have struggles in schools, and really what our notions are about serving all children. So one of the single most identifiers that requires the need for social emotional learning is the identification of poverty. Kids, when they are in poverty, and we serve students in populations of poverty, there are so many different identifiers to those scenarios. So I wanted to show you a video today that will allow you an opportunity to look into what life is like.
I was born by the river in a little tent, and oh, just like that river, I've been running ever since. What was supposed to be our room had like a dead lizard skeleton in there, and we were sleeping on the floor. You know, there were always like gnats around the bananas that we had, and in the backyard, the grass was like really high. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gonna come.
We couldn't afford the house that we were living in before Dad left anymore, so I think the bank took the house, and so we had to move, and then we moved again. I think in the course of 4 or 5 years, we moved in like 7 different houses or something crazy like that.
When my dad left, we were struggling a lot because my mom is disabled and she can't get a job to help to pay for the bills, get food.
I lost a lot of weight. I remember I used to be a size 5, and I went from a size 5 to a size 0. So, you know, I try to not eat too much. I try to eat in school.
There was nights where we didn't have anything to put in our stomachs.
It's been too hard living, but I'm afraid to die, 'cause I don't know what's up there beyond the sky.
I remember sitting at the gas station, she's putting like 50 cents in the gas tank, and I'm like, I see other people, they're putting $20 in. Like, why are you doing that, Mom? And I asked her one day, I'm like, why do you put so little in? She's like, I don't have money to get to work.
She worked 4 jobs. There were days where, like, I hardly saw her at all just because she was working so much and she was always tired. And, like, it was really difficult to make ends meet.
When you're homeless, you don't have too much to call your own. So, you know, food is when you don't have money, you don't have clothing, you know, food is definitely a necessity or a concern. You know, even still to this day, we have, you know, troubles with food.
The first couple of months at the shelter, I felt like I was losing myself. My grades dwindled, my spirit died, and I didn't really want to do much.
You know, when you're kids, you kind of, like, want all these things, and when you don't have the money, you kind of, you know, you're kind of sad. You're like, I kind of want it, but I can't have it.
It was just kind of, like, chaotic, and it just very, I don't know, it didn't make you feel very, like, secure about anything.
It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gonna come.
Oh, yes, it will.
Oh, yes, it will.
So, as you can see from the video, I wanted to be very intentional around what poverty and what social emotional learning looks like. It has very diverse faces, very diverse geographies and context. And it's very important to understand that, because a message that I want to drive home today is that every single adult in every single school is responsible unequivocally for ensuring and believing in the very best outcomes for every single kid. And when you look at videos like this, you can't interact and not be moved. So that's something that's very significant. And when we transition in thinking about what does it mean to be a school that responds to social emotional learning, then I thought about this concept of a block party. You know, when I was younger and I'd come up in block parties, it was a great experience where so many people would bring items and there'd be games and other opportunities to just engage, and there was an entry point of fun and acceptance for everyone. And when I think about this in terms of schools, there are a few things I'd like to highlight here. And when we think about schools, you know, when we look at this box here that says it's not about fixing students, rather it's about transforming schools so that they better serve all students, all being in caps. Because what we see so many times is that schools, they profess to teach and support all kids, but when they're met with the student that is struggling and exudes chronic behavior or emotional challenges, we begin to point the finger toward the parent. And something that I am a huge advocate of is that we took the job to be educators, and our job is to teach every kid that walks through the door. And we've gone to school and spent so many hours in educational programs and professional development. When those students present themselves who have challenges, it's our duty, it's our obligated duty to ensure that we are using those moments to implement all of those opportunities that we've experienced in professional development and not take the escape route in doing so. When we think about the significant student gains will not be sustained without effective leaders who serve as catalysts for the specific actions that turn and drive the success of these schools. So it's very important that leaders are passionate about the vision that they have for schools, that they model the kinds of behaviors that ensure every single kid in that school has a gateway to success, that they're supporting and hiring adults that also model and emulate the kind of passion that ensures every single kid that walks through those doors will have a gateway to success. And then one other thing I'd like to highlight before we transition is schools become high-performing in part by abandoning what does not work and replacing those approaches with those that do. Like, that's a significant piece that I would like to drive home as well, because in schools, we tend to hold on to things that are dear to us, but when asked the question, even most times, even if we are asking the question, why are we doing some of these things that we hold near and dear? And if we're holding them near and dear, are we doing that because they are actually affecting the kinds of results that they're intended to do? So that's something that I really wanted to drive home when we think about a block party. So when we're in schools, are we having a block party for our kids? Are we bringing the kinds of ingredients to our schools that ensure kids are having a great time when they're spending 6 to 8 hours with us, and sometimes even longer? And then how many effective schools would you have to see to be persuaded of the educability of all children? And I say to you, if your answer is more than one, then we have a significant problem. Because really, it doesn't matter. And Ron Edmonds has been talking about this. As you can see, this quote is from 1979. You know, we can, whenever and wherever we choose, successfully teach all children whose schooling is of interest to us. That's a mindset that we have to adopt and we have to employ. And then another quote that I think is significant as well, and that's what we believe about ourselves as educators, our students and their families, is deeply coupled with our sense of responsibility for their learning. So if we are intent and if we are committed, as we all are as educators, to be the advocates for all children in their learning, that there needs to be a deep sense of commitment and responsibility to their learning, not to their teaching, which is why this quote is so significant, because there is a responsibility to learning. And that is a subtle shift, because if kids are learning, then these become demonstrable things that we can see occurring through action and observable practices. So what do we mean when we talk about social and emotional learning? What we're talking about is the recognition of one's emotions, values, strengths, and limitations. Now, over the last 5 to 6 years, these are things when I'm facilitating learning with schools or any groups of teachers, what I notice is this evolution of talking about values is a very important component, because we need to ensure that we're hiring adults in our schools that match the values of the school, and we need to ensure that the values of the school match what the needs are to support the communities that we serve. Then when we think about making ethical and constructive choices in social behavior, are we as adults being sure, and are we responsible for our decisions? You know, when we think about a lot of data that we look at in schools to ensure that schools are progressive, how often are we actually tracking the positive comments that we share, or phone calls that we make, or contacts that we make to parents and to students? But when I go to schools, I see schools evaluate themselves on the exhaustive list of rules and procedures that they expect from students, without actually creating the same exhaustive list and spending that time to be constructive with the kind of recognition that they want to provide to students. And that transitions to the next piece, and that's relationship skills. We come into schools with the expectation that we want kids to respond and have relational contact in a certain way, but we don't hold our adults to do the same thing. And this is where I have observed institutional bullying, where we see adults who understand skillfully or masterfully what the rules are and use those in punitive ways against students versus taking the road less traveled, and that's taking time to work with students and build relationships that become long-lasting. And I think that transitions us to our next, and that's our social awareness. Like, how aware are we of the context in which our kids are coming to us so that we can be more thoughtful about how we share and how we spend time and how we are supportive to students in the time that they share with us. And then those things help, I think, with both. And that's our last piece here, and that's self-management. Are we able to manage our own emotions, our ability when kids present themselves in crisis? Because remember, we're supporting students, not the other way around. And when kids present themselves in crisis, are we developing the resilience, the endurance emotionally to manage our responses so that we can work through the crisis with the student and not fall into crisis ourselves, and then compound that with punitive actions for the students because in crisis the student has said something to us that makes us feel disrespected. So what becomes a vision for social and emotional learning? I think when we're trying to foster it's fostering a healthy and supportive and safe learning environment, because no learning will take place until we start to eliminate blame. Like, nothing is more frustrating to me than when I walk inside a school and you hear a plethora of excuses from adults about what parents could be doing more about supporting their students. And I'll share a quick story. I said, well, what I would say to my teachers is, Miss Johnson is not going to bring you her experimental child to school and say, you know what, Mr. Simmons, I'm going to let you experiment with little Johnny, because if you do right by him, then I'm going to bring you my other child that I have at home who I actually parented the best, and you'll have a really great time with him. So you just spend time with Johnny. If you do well with him, then I know I can bring my other children to you and see how you do with them. That's just not how it works. Parents bring to us the very best student that they have and the very best child that they knew how to parent. And then they expect us to do right by them and ensure that we're building them up to be the very best kind of person that they can be. So eliminating blame is a huge thing. And then we need to establish a safe environment. And to unpack that, it simply means, are you creating the kind of environment that you would want to be in if you were in your very most vulnerable state? If you are creating that environment in every single classroom and in your school, then you're establishing a safe environment. And then when we talk about establishing an accurate understanding of all children, that's going back to what we talked about in the previous slide, and that's around, are we building the kinds of relationships where all kids feel connected to the adults in the school? Strategies that I would employ and I've seen done in other places. Is there a safe adult that every single child can go to in your school? So whether you're calling that, whether that's small learning centers in your school, whether that's some kind of check-in with a counselor, but there needs to be an adult or some system of adults that every single child is connected to, so when something happens, they can reach out to them. And then, are we using structures and processes that promote relationships? So these are very intentional strategies that need to be in place, because the processes that promote relationships. So are we taking intentional time to ensure teachers are truly building quality relationships by contacting parents before something negative goes out and say something positive about every single kid and why they enjoy spending time with them? really rethinking how we spend parent-teacher conferences to talk about celebration sessions. Like, I really love your student. He or she is inside the classroom and they're working really hard. They may not be at a mastery level, but I really enjoy the work ethic that they're putting in, because every parent wants to hear something positive. And what I found is when parents receive multiple calls that are in a negative sense or punitive, it makes them disengage and not feel confident in the school that it's a safe place for their kids. So we really want to make sure that structures are in place that promote positive relationships, which transitions us into the next. And when you do those things, parents and families are engaged. They become partners. And things that I've seen in great schools, things that I've tried to employ myself, that's reaching out to parents and doing surveys to ask parents, how would they like to be engaged in the school? Because sometimes as educational institutions, we are so driven around the data and the instructional progress, we don't take a step back just to ask parents, how would they like to participate in the school to fill gaps that we actually may have in the school outside of the instructional focus. So these are things that I believe drive a healthy, supportive, safe learning environment, which will give you the foundation to be able to focus on learning. And being able to focus on learning will now create the space to develop a common instructional framework. When we're thinking about students who have social emotional needs, we need to ensure that there are common instructional practices that are occurring to create a pattern of prediction or predictability in students as they are progressing from one class to the next. Because remember, our students who have social emotional needs need to have some consistency. The consistency begins to develop the trust that will reduce some of their anxiety that will push them into crisis. Now, this is something that's really simple. We want to teach every single kid to read proficiently. When kids have the access to reading and they can read really well, it's cliche. The world opens up to them. Now, the challenge becomes is when these students present themselves primarily in an upper elementary and secondary setting, we are at a disadvantage because many times schools just don't have the bandwidth or the resources for those students. So but now listing this, I'm suggesting if you have even one student in your school and you're in one of those settings, now is the time to go out and invest in those resources so we're preparing for the student and not being surprised by the student and continue to miseducate them or promote them or hold them back in ways because we haven't done our due diligence to best support them. And then I think confronting and eliminating tracking inability. One of the traps that has come to us behind working in a accountable or no child left behind environment is that we're so focused on who's progressing or who's proficient that we fall into the traps of moving kids into these groups without really thinking about all of the learning that's required for the student to ensure that they're progressing appropriately behaviorally and emotionally, which supports their instructional development. Something here as well with the providing additional quality instructional time. That's really thinking about when I go to schools, I hear this so often, we just don't have enough time to do all the things. And I always try and do an instructional time audit. So what are you doing with the time that you have from the moment school starts to the time that it ends? So there are opportunities to use blended learning approaches in a way that accelerates the ability for you to use instructional time and accelerate learning. And these are things that I know Renee will talk about further. But I think providing and really thinking through how you're spending your instructional time is a very critical moment that supports bringing social emotional learners to a proficient space. The other thing is promoting engagement and ownership. This is a significant strategy because we want to ensure that kids accept responsibility for their learning. Like, in order for kids to progress and be college ready or be ready for the workforce, they need to own their responsibilities prior to getting to those places. I've worked with some projects where we brought students and they had internship opportunities, and we worked really hard for them to get to the internship. They get into the job, and then we realized it was the retention that became an issue. So the ability to teach and give feedback about resilience. And these are things that we want to make sure we're teaching intentionally inside the workspace. So the promotion of engagement and ownership of learning also teaches and promotes resilience and the intentionality of giving feedback about their threshold for resilience. And then offering job-embedded professional learning. I think that's crucial. For all of our adults, we really need to ensure that we're providing the kind of information and spending time with teachers so that their time is well spent, that they're actually able to engage in activities that really drive the kind of work that they're doing in their context. If I've heard it once, I've heard it 1,000 times, that teachers would much rather be anywhere in the world than going to traditional sit-and-get, one-stop shop professional development. So thinking through the kind of professional development that relates best to the teachers and the context that they're serving. So I just wanted to share some strategies that I would recommend one using less of, as teacher lectures, the time in which you're spending with those teacher lectures, which is why I'm such a huge proponent of blended learning, because it balances the time that you're spending with the instructor versus the time that you have to guide and accelerate your own learning. Teacher interventions, inflexible discipline, competition, literal comprehension, independent seat work. So these are kinds of things. These are the traditional things, but we want to make sure we're doing more of the things that we see on the right. How much time are we getting or are we spending with kids to get their input on what kinds of things are happening? How much time are we actually spending doing student problem solving, where it may take more time? And this is where I think many times in classrooms we get caught in this conundrum of, are we, should I just press forward and do more of the content, or am I pressing forward for the opportunity of learning? And that goes back to the quote I was sharing earlier around, are we teaching? Are we progressing to just teach, or are we progressing for student learning? And the student problem solving is a specific example around your focus on student learning. And then I would say I would progress down to the last piece, the last item, and that's self-assessment. The ability for students to self-assess is a connection to student goal setting, and these are things with students who have social and emotional learning challenges really, really benefit well from, because it allows them to see themselves and do their own evaluation of their behaviors and their performance through their own lens. Because many times they aren't able to reflect appropriately, nor has anyone ever sat with them to reflect on how they're performing, and then ensuring that they see themselves through their own lens by setting goals and assessing their progress toward those goals. So these are just a few things that I wanted to share with you all today about best practices and context around supporting students with social and emotional learning. I would like to transition now to Renee so she can talk to you more about how Fuel-Led and their breadth of services can provide support in you solving some of these strategies to support your social emotional learners.
Thank you, Kwame. And, this is great to see, and the idea of really moving into the more of that the side on the right, and really taking what teachers, in terms of their time commitment and what their instructional time is being used for, and allowing teachers to truly have the opportunities to do the things that are on that more side. I feel like as a teacher myself and in working with many schools across the nation, I have seen that teachers have more of a commitment to the things on the left side, or more of the need to deliver the content that they're required to deliver. And they're pressed for time to complete the things that you have on the more side. And so what Fuel Education does provide is it provides the curriculum or content that can help with the piece that teachers want to move away from, allowing students to progress at their own time. Kwame mentioned various blended learning models and how students are able to work at a different pace or on their own pace, and allowing teachers to properly group students and work with students who are struggling, focusing more on their growth versus everybody delivering and receiving information and being proficient at the exact same time. There are needs of many students, as Kwame said, and really focusing on those student needs and ensuring that they are addressed, bringing in the relationship, their basic needs, and the relevance you can help those students see can be something that the teachers truly focus on. At Fuel Education, we have, and we actually believe in, an incredible need for meeting the whole student. And we may not be able to do that through a delivery of content, but we do feel that ensuring the support and developing the social emotional needs of a student is something that we can partner with our districts on. So we have a few ways that we do this partnership. One of them is through the social emotional learning that we've embedded directly in our curriculum. So we really look at, in terms of primarily a credit recovery solution. This is a good example. If you've got students who are struggling, who have possibly dropped out, or as Kwame was mentioning before, the poverty level of the students who may not be able to have their basic needs met won't necessarily be able to have their education and academic needs, or that's not their focus. Their focus is their primary needs. When a student comes back into school and they're already credit deficient and they move into a credit recovery model at a school, a lot of times those students are already feeling behind. They're already struggling, and to put them in a credit recovery solution may not necessarily still provide them the academic enrichment that they need. So what we've done at Fuel Education is designed the credit recovery solution that will help the students to recover their credits that they need using a very diagnostic-driven model so that helps students to master concepts they already know, but most importantly, to insert in those courses this motivational learning that really focuses on the development of a growth mindset. And so I'll give you kind of the example of how the model works. An educational psychologist, John Keller, synthesizes that there are decades of motivational literature, and he puts that in his paper called First Principles of Motivation to Learn and E-Learning. And he proposes the ARCS model for motivating students based on 4 primary motivators: attention, relevance, competence, and satisfaction. And Fuel Education used this research in the development of the social emotional learning lessons that were built directly in the credit recovery courses. Those courses are really focusing on things like grit and growth mindset and helping students to see and believe in more of that motivation that's intrinsic, with this consistent persistence to want them to be motivated to complete their courses and continue through school. This may not necessarily be meeting their personal or basic needs or relationships, but this is allowing the teacher to provide that need by allowing the system to deliver the content and curriculum while continuously supporting and encouraging the students. In addition to that, we've made it very flexible for students who are in that type of environment where maybe they do need to have accessibility to those courses and have additional support tools, maybe some text-to-speech, translation, dictionaries for vocabulary for students who are struggling. So a lot of the accessibility is embedded directly into the courses as well. And then the instructional model allows something that teachers really love to do. I, as a teacher personally, back when I was teaching, would have loved to allow students who were proficient in a unit to move on, and then the students who didn't get it or it didn't click, to be able to still hold on and support them and give them the remediation they need. But in a classroom, it's very difficult to hold those students back when everybody else is moving forward. So the instructional model is designed to pre-assess the students on skills and standards. And if they are proficient, it allows them to work at their pace. And if they are not proficient and are still struggling to meet specific standards and skills, it delivers the content that the student needs with a lot of engaging, activating their interest into what the learning is at hand. And within those lessons are embedded additional social-emotional learning lessons. So here's a few screenshots I'm going to put up of, and these are all interactive in the system, but I'm just showing you what a few of these screenshots look like of a few of the lessons. So one is talking about geniuses and what the students really believe about that. Do you believe they're born or made? And then we move then into really talking about what it means to have a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset in your belief of that. If you believe they're born and therefore you're not born a genius, you have a fixed mindset. And really taking them through how intelligence can be strengthened. And this is one example of a social-emotional learning lesson that a student would go through. Another one is to really think about failures and reminding students of role models out there that they're aware of and understanding how they handled failure, and that not everything to them might have been a success. And here's another example of Albert Einstein. And then it provides the engaging interaction within the lesson as well. So they're not just reading it, there's some interactive tools as well for students to move through this lesson. And so looking at what oh, actually, I almost forgot about this one. I'm sorry. And the other piece that is really fantastic within the system is, so when you see these social-emotional learning lessons come in, there's the opportunity as well for a recommendation engine. And that's the technology that's built into the course as well that allows the system to know what a student needs based on their interest and based on every click they're making. So for example, if you go to Netflix and you are selecting specific movies or specific shows, Netflix has a recommended engine. It's an algorithm that is set up to determine what are the recommended television shows or other movies that you might be interested in based on what you're currently watching. And so our credit recovery courses at Fuel Education also include these recommended engines. If a student is clicking through the system and through the multiple choice, fill in the blank, engaging, interactive practice questions that it asks the student, if it's noticing that the student is consistently missing specific key skills, or if it notices that the student is really interested in accessing specific resources, it is going to populate a recommended engine and add in more courses or more lessons for the student and more activities for them as well. So this allows that piece to be taken completely away from the teacher. So the teacher doesn't have to be really involved at that content level, delivering every piece of the content, monitoring which students are needing to move ahead and which students are sticking behind. And then the best piece of it is the data that comes behind that allows teachers to really work on what Kwame was talking about, which is really to focus on which students do I need to spend more time with, which students need more of that relationship, and I can pull in that time that I have now to spend with those students. So as we think about what Kwame and I have talked about so far, we have really talked about ways that your district can meet these social-emotional learning needs. We've also looked at ways that you can keep social-emotional learning in mind when you're discussing and considering various remediation needs or remedial needs for your students. And then also really looking at how can it be incorporated into your curriculum so that you really can focus more on the time that you need to support those students and their basic needs, the relationships, and helping them to provide that relevance. And Fuel Education, so that you know, provides not just the content enrichment and the many courses that include the ways that we can support teachers there, but as Andrew mentioned at the beginning, I lead a team of education solutions specialists, and we really do focus with partnering with school districts to discuss ways that not just our content and curriculum and solutions can be fit into your program, but also with the consulting and support on really focusing on that instructional framework. How does that partner with the school model and with the specific demographic needs of your students? So with that, Andrew, I'm going to kick it over to you so that we could get more into some of the questions that might have come up from the audience.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Renee, and thank you, Kwame, for really a fascinating presentation about a really challenging issue. We do have, a little bit under 15 minutes for questions. So if you haven't yet got your question in, now would be the time to do so. And but let's first, Kwame, I'm going to come to you with the first question from the audience, which is, you talked in your presentation about effective structures and processes that can promote relationships. Can you give some examples based on your experience of those kinds of structures and processes?
Absolutely. Thank you, Andrew. What I would recommend as a very powerful strategy are morning meetings with the entire school. So if you are a school leader, an academy leader, a grade level leader, classroom leader, I think there's tremendous value in greeting all of the students together. As a school leader, I would do that once a week. I'd always check in with the students on Monday mornings to see, how things went over the weekend, just to let them know that, I'm excited to see them, let them know any announcements that were coming up, because over time they began to use that also as a forum to raise issues that they had, or an opportunity for us to do some short-term recognition of students. I think also focus groups are very important. If you are in a diverse school or just in a secondary setting, these kinds of issues happen at different levels of growth and development. So what I call affinity groups, so allowing girls to have focus groups and talk about issues that are concerning to them, allowing boys to do the same thing. If you're in a more diverse school, allowing different racial and ethnic groups to come together and raise concerns where they feel there is a sense of safety and support in that environment, and allowing those concerns to be progressed.
All right, terrific. Well, thank you very much, Kwame. I'm going to now come to Renee. A question has come in about a specific aspect of the Fuel Ed product, and someone is asking how they can get a personalized demo of these courses for their school. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. We'd be happy. I see that Andrew has put up our resource page. When you go to our resource page, or if you just want to go to fueleducation.com, you'll have the option right there to request a personal demonstration of our content and curriculum, and then somebody would reach right out to you and be able to schedule that for you.
Okay, great. All right, perfect. Thanks so much. And now, Kwame, I'm going to come back to you. And a question the audience is asking is, what does emotionally stable look like? And what factors should the school look for, these administrators look for in a student to tell if they are emotionally stable or not? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, very clear indicators are when we establish a baseline of goals for students with social-emotional learning challenges, so that way they can see milestones of progression in their behavioral choices or their academic outcomes. I think that, there are, and what you'll also be able to observe and talk to them about is their resilience. We want to build their resilience to endure situations of stress, because there are stressful situations that actually trigger responses that become inappropriate in the school setting, which also triggers another response for me, Andrew. I think that it's important to know sometimes we call behaviors inappropriate at school, but sometimes those behaviors are actually necessary in the environment that some of our kids are coming from. And this is why the relationships and understanding the context of which we are supporting students is critically important, because we want to appreciate the culture and the environment that the kids have to endure. And if they are approached or feel disrespected and may respond in a way that we perceive to be disrespectful in the school setting, we have to use that as a learning moment to then progress and begin to teach them how to respond in both settings. And it's something when I am doing conferences, it's what we call code switching. It's to ensure that when you are in one environment that might be more informal, that you have the skill set and you are aware that when the environment changes, there are expectations around how you should respond more appropriately.
Okay. No, well, that makes sense. And while we're on that subject, I mean, you are essentially advocating for a different reaction from teachers to what they might have perceived to be a disrespectful act, which brings me back to the question of professional development. And you mentioned this during your presentation. You talked about job-embedded professional learning. Can you talk a little bit more about professional development and what it takes to make that change in an institution, in a school, with the teachers? How do you start making that, changing the course and getting teachers to approach things differently? What's the approach that you've found works best?
So I have used the research by Dr. Ronald Heifetz out of Harvard, and Ron has used so much time and research and produced a great deal of documents around what change management looks like, and he has coined the term adaptive challenges. And one of the things he talks about in the theory of adaptive challenges is that everyone in the organization that is trying to make the change is a part of the problem. So that is the first lever that makes people feel uncomfortable, because if you're a type A personality, like I am, we have really great ideas. And it's hard for us to believe sometimes that, if we have a really great idea, that to conceive that someone else actually has an idea that could be better. So what's important about that is to ensure that when you are introducing, everyone has to own that we all have to get better, right? And in order for us to have success, we all have to be making steps toward doing things differently toward what we all agree will be a better outcome for kids and a better environment for all adults to work in and support students.
Okay. All right, terrific. Well, thank you very much. And for the next question, I'm going to actually look to both of you at this point, and maybe I'll start with Renee. And the question concerns, schools have a lot of concerns, including things like dropout prevention. And the question is, how can we maximize usage of the courses amidst all these other concerns? Can you talk a little bit about that? And then, Kwame, I don't know if you want to follow up on that or not.
Sure, absolutely. There's a lot of different needs and ways that you can leverage courses to meet the various needs. So you mentioned dropout prevention as one of them. And that is an area that we do look at, what are the reasons. It generally does start with what are some of the reasons that students are struggling, or what is what contributed to the student falling behind or dropping out. So we look at even things like those credit recovery courses. They may be a great solution, but the student may really need that reading remediation in order for them to be successful moving forward. So it could be some literacy courses and support or supplemental tools that can be provided to help support the student through that. Maybe it's a language limitation. So you might have some ELL students that are struggling or a high ELL population. So you can leverage some ELL curriculum and content that provides that added support that students need to then continue through that success in courses. So a lot of times we look at online courses as a credit recovery only model, and that's not necessarily the case. There could be the focus for those students could also be in finding relevance and getting them some career and technical education as well. Looking at Fuel Ed has some CTE courses that include pathways that help students receive certification. They may not be college bound, but they can be certified in an industry and focus on something that brings relevance and interest to those students as well.
Terrific. All right. Kwame, do you have anything to add to that, or do you want to move on to the next question?
Yes, I agree completely with Renee. I think the other thing, to consider is that sometimes kids don't want to be bothered. They're human beings. And I think we fall into traps of thinking that because we're so driven around timelines of instructional windows that kids and our students are robots, that they're just going to respond as we see fit. And I think utilizing the courses creates opportunity for kids who don't want to be bothered to be able to continue doing their work versus traditional punitive measures of them having to leave the instructional environment for some kind of remediation, where I just don't want to be bothered, but the content is still available. They can go off to a corner and get that done. And then sometimes for students who are really struggling, you can implement best practices of having, the smaller group instruction or peer-to-peer opportunities to continue progressing while the teacher is doing more face-to-face with a larger group of students, or that in reverse. So that would be the only thing that I would add.
All right. Well, no, thank you very much. We probably have time for one more question. And Renee, I'm going to direct it to you. And someone in the audience wants to know whether they can utilize courses to align to a practice support program. Do you have anything you can talk to about that?
I'm sorry, can you say that aligned to? I didn't hear your question exactly.
A practice support program?
Our courses align to all sorts of different solutions, and we really pride ourselves in the initial, what we call kind of your onboard or discovery session, where we can look at what is included in those sessions and what is it that you need to, or what do you strive for in those sessions, and then looking at the courses that will align to that. There are a lot of different ways that we have taken courses that might be a partial fit, and with the customization that you can do within our platform allows teachers to take pieces of that and leverage what we have, we call our library of tools that then allow the teacher to take maybe something you're doing in the school and in the classroom and insert that into these courses that we offer. So the flexibility of taking what you have and what we have and working with our, my educational services team to put something together that makes perfect sense for your solution. It is really how we take that partnership and look at the alignments of a school and a program to what we're able to offer.
Okay, terrific. Well, thank you very much. We are almost out of time. We have gone through the entire hour. If any of you asked a question today that we didn't get to, rest assured someone from the Fuel Ed team will follow up with you directly to get you some answers. I would also encourage you to visit the Fuel Ed website at the URL that I've just should be coming up onto your screen any second now. Visit that website to take a look at some of the resources that are available to you there. And that is it for today. As we wrap up, I really want to thank Kwame Simmons and Renee Aboud again for An excellent presentation and a very interesting discussion there at the end. I'd also like to thank Fuel Education for its support. And one final reminder, we will be sending out that email to everyone when the recording of the webinar is ready. So thank you again, and this concludes today's webinar. Goodbye.